of the really most important things of this was having proactive investments for our residents and neighborhoods, and utilizing evidence-based crime reduction strategies that were data-driven to really look at how do we impact our high potential residents who are likely to become an offender or victim, and providing those proactive investments within the neighborhoods to make sure that we were utilizing those funds to really invest in taking our public safety strategies to a next level. The second part of what the Community First Public Safety Framework really looked at was safety by design, which is, you'll hear CPTED. The fun part of the city is we love our acronyms, but CPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. And really what that is utilizing different things within the community to look at how we can prevent crime. So in installing lights, cameras, activating public spaces, and using those public spaces to give community opportunity to really invest and change different things within their community. The second is, how do we respond to crisis and or crimes that are happening? We have those emergency response, which are traditional public safety mechanisms that are within our city, which are police, firefighter, and paramedics, but also looking how that alternative response could, so the alternative response could really affect our residents in different manners to make sure that we are meeting them where they're at and looking at what they need at that time. The second part is to have crisis intervention, which is interrupting the cycles of crime and violence and lightening the loads for officers or those that would definitely have to respond, and utilizing our social workers, housing counselors, and other community public health workers to do that, that work in that sense. So that was what the beginning of the Community First Public Safety Framework was. And so that was the introduction of our CARES team, our COAST team, and our HEART team. And those are our community response teams that are here along with me. Next slide. And I'm sorry if you're getting background noise. I am in a public space, so my apologies for somebody that's not the TV. I'm in a public space as I'm multitasking. But the Community First Public Safety Commission's 5 major areas of desired impact. And the Community First Public Safety Commission was a 38 member commission of individuals and residents selected by Mayor Carter to really address what does innovation in public safety look like. And for a year and a half, along with Harvard, as well as the Citizens League, they came up with these 5 major areas of desired impact, which was more appropriate responders, decriminalizing behavior in response for communities of color, and particularly folks experiencing different socioeconomic status, making it more efficient deployment of our law enforcement resources. As we all know, law enforcement has said for a long time that we know we can't arrest our way out of things, but also that there are other folks within the community that are better served responding to certain events where they could be utilized, focusing on prevention and community safety, and looking at what does each community within the city of St. Paul feel safety looks like for them, as well as what is prevention, and then improving the systems and increasing accessibility. As we're looking at reimagining public safety, we're looking at reimagining the systems that have been here for over 100+ years and how we can be innovative in changing those, but also working together in a collaborative and cohesive manner and process. And with that, I will turn it back over to Rachel to have each one of our teams give an insight of what they have going on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Director Blakey. I'm actually wondering if we can hear from Andrew about his work with the Office of Neighborhood Safety and the Commission.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So as Rachel mentioned, I'm Andrew Bentley. I live in South Minneapolis, and I've been working with the city of St. Paul in some capacity for the past 2.5 years, starting with the Mayor Carter's administration 2.5 years ago. So I work for the Harvard Kennedy School Government Performance Lab. We are a hybrid research and policy implementation organization. So we spend a lot of our time trying to think deeply about how emerging trends in community safety and the ultimate question of how do we expand our public safety systems across the country to make sure they're more rooted in those who are most impacted by violence, more diverse in terms of the voices and decisions that are made, and also are effective and high impact. And we started as a pilot. We did pro bono support to the commission that Brooke mentioned, the Community First Public Safety Commission, the 47-person member commission that was mayoral appointed, which had a diversity of interests and affiliations. There were 13 different affiliations across or interest areas across the commission. We provided a strategy and research for that group. And one of their key charges was, should the city set up a city staff office for neighborhood safety? The other charge that we focused on was, what should community involvement be in that area? So we worked with then Director Sasha Cotton for the Office of Violence Prevention in Minneapolis to put together research of how these offices operate across the country and how it could work in St. Paul as well. And after that, we helped the commission put a series of recommendations together that Brooke mentioned. And I'm really proud of the fact that the commission came together in a really difficult time period, and 95% of commissioners recommended we stand up a city staffed office. It was nearly universal. And there's a big, large unified call for an approach for an office that can coordinate strategy across violence prevention programs, as well as be a deeply engaged community arm for the city's efforts to reduce violence. So we stayed on and worked with the Office of Violence Prevention to implement the office. And at the heart of our implementation support was making sure that's what we called shared decision making. So this is what the commission wanted. How can residents of neighborhoods most impacted by violence help decide what programs they would like the city to invest in and how those are evaluated? So we worked to set up the Neighborhood Safety Community Council and figure out what the city ordinance should look like, who should be on it, how it should be structured, as well as making sure the approaches to hiring our amazing director, Brooke, had community voice in it as well. So after working for a year, and I'm proud of the fact that the city had a really pretty fast implementation of that office. We found across the country, it takes about 18 to 24 months to implement the office. We were able to reduce that to about 9 months, which is great. Next, we're working on how do we evaluate what the office is working on now and make sure that it's high impact. So we're helping Brooke build an evaluation strategy and figure out how to communicate the great work that's happening across the city. The last thing I'll say is, from my perspective, I get the privilege of talking with directors around the country, and actually we have another city that we're working with as well. And one of the highly unique things about St. Paul that is really motivating is the fact that there's such a large coalition of folks coming together in this moment to do this work, right? From law enforcement to activists to mental health, service providers and experts to students. It's really unique and encouraging. And I think St. Paul has the opportunity to be an incredible example for the rest of the country about how coming together, working through differences, but also finding common areas of interest can result in an expanded public safety system that works for more people. And yeah, so that's our work.
Thanks, Andrew and Brooke, and thanks for joining us from DC as you're busy at another conference for something else. So appreciate your time today. Like I said before, my name is Rachel Walsh. I am an innovation consultant with the city, and predominantly my portfolio is encompassed with public safety work. And I first started in this work in the first iteration of our Community First Public Safety Work Group, as we were bringing folks together, partners that were within the city, as well as partnerships with folks in the community, working to really get upstream on some of our violence prevention and community safety efforts. And then I had the pleasure of working with Andrew as we started the implementation of the Office of Neighborhood Safety and the work to bring Brooke on board and was really lucky and honored to continue in this work as we are implementing those recommendations from the commission to stand up our Coast Cares Heart team as well as ONS. And so I'm going to turn it over to these teams who really are the heart and backbone of our Community First Public Safety Framework to talk more about their work. So I'm going to pass it over to Sergeant Justin Tiffany, to talk about the work of our Community Outreach and Stabilization Unit in the St. Paul Police Department.
Thank you, Rachel, for that introduction. As Rachel had said, my name is Justin Tiffany. I'm currently assigned to the Coast Unit as a sergeant, and I coordinate the day-to-day activities. I would like to begin with a brief history on our Coast Unit. In 2016, we started looking at some of the mental health response calls in the city of St. Paul that were being diverted to law enforcement. And what we noticed is over about a 10-year time frame, the calls for service related to mental health or substance use had doubled. And so we began asking ourselves, how can we be more reflective of the needs of our community? And we established a work group to explore different alternatives and different responses. And once that work group was established, we traveled to various locations throughout the United States to explore different police department programming. Specifically, we went to Madison, Wisconsin and Albuquerque, New Mexico. Those locations functioned in a co-response program and case management, which paired a licensed clinical social worker or various different forms of social workers with sworn officers to respond to crises. In roughly 2018, our mental health unit, or the first iteration of COAST, began with several officers and a couple of clinicians from Ramsey County, which is the county in which St. Paul resides. We expanded our programming in 2020 to include substance use disorder referrals and treatment to help those afflicted with chemical health issues. And thus we changed our name from the mental health unit to the Community Outreach and Stabilization Unit to be more reflective of our expanded programming. Currently, we operate two different teams, a recovery access program, which is the program focused on chemical health, and a mental health resource team, which is focused on mental health. Both of these teams pair clinicians with sworn officers, and both teams offer drop-in hours, community education, follow-up on incidents, and care coordination, diagnostic assessments, and referrals to treatment. So far in 2022, we've made over 850 mental health referrals for supported services. We've done over 500 mental and chemical health assessments. I would note that from 2018 to current, we've noted a 77% decrease in law enforcement contacts for individuals who have had frequent contact with law enforcement prior to our interaction. And that is what we define as 3 or more contacts within a 12-month time frame. Most recently, I had a conversation this week with one of our LADCs about a specific incident, and I think it's fairly indicative of the type of programming and services that we offered. Our LADC connected with an unsheltered veteran in our community who was experiencing a substance use disorder. They had had previous challenges interacting and integrating into treatment because of insurance issues. Specifically, they were not getting access to treatment because of a transportation. Insurance simply wouldn't pay for transportation to the treatment facility. Our licensed alcohol and drug counselor did a fantastic job in coordinating some of the care located at a facility. They spoke with the consumer, and ultimately they were able to arrange transportation to the facility. The consumer later followed up with the LADC. They were crying because they were so grateful that they had finally had an opportunity to go to treatment when they've been waiting for months. The entire premise of the COAST unit and of many of these programs is to divert or deflect individuals suffering from serious mental illness or chemical use disorder away from a criminal justice response. And with that, I will pass it to Andrea Hinderacker with the HEART team.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. I too am very excited to be a part of the optimal response teams and understanding that community safety first 100% applies not only to folks who are living in homes and are sheltered, but to all of our neighbors and our community members in St. Paul, which is the spirit behind the HEART team. We were developed in late fall of last year. I came on board as the coordinator in March of this year. We are a team of 3, essentially. We are housed in the Department of Safety and Inspection with the city. And this is really an important component of our team and how effectively and efficiently we work within the community. Essentially, we track our number of encampments throughout our community. Many of those are reported to us through community observations or different ways of communication. But essentially, our DSI inspector goes out to locate the encampments that have been reported to us. And he does just a basic demographic look of that area. He's really focused on the structure and the safety of the encampment and the overall safety of the individuals who are there. So he will come back and he will say there's 1 tent, 3 people, maybe there's a pet, any type of really important information. And then our outreach worker goes out after that encounter and does the deep dive. And what she does is she goes in and really begins to understand that individual or group of individuals' circumstances, what led them to that location, who they've been connected with as far as services throughout their time unsheltered, where things might have fallen, where the gaps are, if perhaps they are in a different place of readiness now than they were at a different time when they were working with organizations that were advocating for their needs. So right now in St. Paul, we have about 50 different encampment sites throughout our community. But what this really boils down to is about 124 human beings that this morning woke up in freezing cold, wet temperatures and are not only trying to navigate how to make it through the day with, a risk of hypothermia, with trying to figure out how to just stay warm, but also then trying to figure out how am I supposed to navigate my way out of the situation I'm in and survive at the same time and manage my mental health and maintain the relationships that I'm trying to hold on to and all of those complexities. So what we look at from our perspective from HEART is that it isn't enough just to go in and say, hey, you can't be here, right? This is city property. You can't camp. Camping is not legal in St. Paul. But to say, recognize that you're here for a reason. You chose this location for a reason. How is it meeting your needs in a survival standpoint? And then how do we work with you to connect with the folks and the resources and help you see that as a community member of St. Paul, you deserve better than daily survival. This kind of translates into different things. For instance, we've had some great success in the past couple of weeks, folks who had just at some point decided, I can't navigate the system. I don't have the means to stay in communication with folks who are working with me. So our outreach worker relentlessly engaged, continued to re-engage when folks moved on their own or had to be relocated because they were on private property, always building rapport. 4 leases were signed in the last week alone by long-term unsheltered folks who had simply just decided that this was the existence that they had to accept because the system was too difficult to navigate. So essentially, we are not case managers. We cannot follow someone straight through from an unsheltered place all the way through into housing and continue to make sure that they're successful. But what we do is build relationships and build rapport with our community service providers, to include our community outreach workers, our St. Paul Police Department, St. Paul Fire Department, our medical providers, understanding that all of us are shelter providers, day service providers, our affordable housing organizations, all of us have an ability to become a part of an individual's journey from homelessness into security. We, like most communities, have a shortfall when it comes to deeply affordable housing and options. Our shelters are essentially full as soon as 10 o'clock hits. Our largest shelter and an emergency shelter are all at capacity. So we also acknowledge that it's not enough to say, hey, you can go to shelter. That's just not an answer anymore. So we say, who are you? What are your personal resources, family, friends, past connections? What is it that we can zero in on with you as an individual and figure out your path that doesn't depend on the standard answer? There's always shelter. There's always going to be somewhere where you can go, because that isn't truth. And so that is just in a nutshell who we are as the Homeless Assistance Response Team in St. Paul. I will move on now to the CARES team and introduce my colleague, Dwayne Gibbs.
Hello, I'm Dwayne Gibbs. I'm with St. Paul Fire's Mobile Crisis Response Unit. It's called the CARES team. The CARES team is an alternative response unit that's been created to respond to mental health and behavioral emergencies. This, of course, involves members of our community who are experiencing challenges with addiction, unsheltered homelessness, and exploitation. Each CARES team unit is comprised of 2 people, a licensed clinical social worker and an emergency medical technician to evaluate and treat basic to life-threatening medical needs. For the last several months, we've developed an operational plan, established logistics, acquired and trained EMT staff from the fire side of things, and very shortly we will acquire and train social workers and begin our first implementation phase. What makes this alternative is our focus on crisis intervention, de-escalation, and along with that, situation evaluation, stabilization, and channeling our clients to the right resources to meet their immediate and long-term needs. And this involves connecting or reconnecting them to the resources and service providers that they already have. In addition, we are focusing on follow-up and continuous engagement. And so the end goal of the CARES team is stabilizing our clients and bringing them to a pre-crisis level so that they can make choices based on that are not mandated by addiction or mental illness, and get them on a trajectory towards a functional life as much as possible for that individual. And with that, I will turn it back to Rachel.
Thanks, Dwayne. I'm actually gonna kick it back to Director Blakey to quickly talk about Project Peace and Aspire and some of the other work of ONS. And then after that, we will open it up for questions. So if you have questions that are popping up for you, feel free to put them in the chat or get ready to raise your hand. So Director Blakey.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, Project Peace and Operation Aspire is the direct service component of the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And what Project Peace and Operation Aspire are is a collaborative work agreement on focused deterrence with the St. Paul Police Department, addressing individuals that are involved in gun violence throughout the city of St. Paul and some of our surrounding suburbs. And really what that is doing what is called focused deterrence. In the community, you might hear it as GVI or CVI work. And really what that is there's a small percentage of individuals that are engaged in a large percentage of the crime that we see. And so through crime prevention, as well as focused deterrence, means finding that individual and focusing all of those needs on them with prevention and intervention, some things that are environmental design, where they live or where they might frequent, accountability to not only that individual, but for the community who is saying this is not what we would like, and then some enforcement pieces, which is at the end of when we have provided as many services, intervention and prevention, and some individuals still need that enforcement component, and then dealing with the re-entry and the healing process that happens after they have a consequence and are reintroduced within and back to the community. So Project Aspire, Project Peace and Operation Aspire was launched in July. And so we're roughly about 6 months in. So looking at the evaluation process right now of what did it impact. I will say that we're still working with evaluations, but all of the areas in which we were looking for a decrease, that has happened. And so I don't have the actual data right now that has been, what's the word I'm looking for? I just lost my mind. My words, validated. So it hasn't been validated, so I'm not able to share it right now, but it's very promising information and the impact and resources, but really looking at our community-based organizations to provide those wraparound services and ones that are culturally specific for individuals, as well as looking at innovative and different things that address healing. So working with our other public health partners within the county. Healing Streets, which is another county program, and as well as different initiatives within Ramsey County to address those individuals that are experiencing violence. The wraparound services also include the family as well as victims as well. So it's not just looking at the individuals who have perpetrated the crime, but those that have suffered from and are learning to take those next steps to get themselves in a place where they feel that they are another vital participant within our city. So that is Project Peace and Aspire, and I will turn it over to Rachel for questions.
All right, I am going to put the contact information for the team up there. I'll also put it in the chat in a bit here. We are getting some questions, and so you can send it directly to me or to everyone. That's totally fine. But first question, are these services all accessed by calling 911? And does a dispatcher determine which team is the best recipient to a call? This is a great question. Not the first time we've received this question, but Director Blakey, do you want to take that one? I know you've been in the conversations with our ECC at the county level.
Yes, currently Coast and Heart are currently in operation. The CARES team, as well as Project Aspire and Peace, are in the piloting phases of that. But yes, calling 911 will start the process. We are working with alternative response with Ramsey County ECC about what it looks like for that to eventually evolve into real-time reporting. Currently, it is really more of a referral process where we are notified during and after, but it's not direct dispatch. So you can't call right now and get a coast officer that's going to show up or get a HEART team. It really is triaging that information currently and then looking at what are the appropriate responses. Currently, it's kind of like a parallel response right now as we are developing and setting in policies and procedures moving forward about how to integrate that into a 24/7, 365 immediate response. We're not there yet, but we're being ambitious about those next steps. I see Andrea, go for it.
Yeah, this is actually really an important point for HEART, which might distinguish a little bit from the larger teams. We are absolutely not a first call. The reason we're in the Department of Safety and Inspection is we have a separate number that comes to us, and it really is, by and large, the same number you call if, and this is not to, I don't want to parallel this with human lives, but this is how this is. The Department of Safety and Inspection receives all calls. My neighbor doesn't mow their grass. Someone dropped off a mattress in my alley. I see that there are tents in the park. Like, those all come to the Department of Safety and Inspection. And it's because they're observations, it's not emergency. If there was a concern about the immediate safety of someone who is in a tent, or the immediate concern of the community in the area of where there is an encampment, if there's a fire, those are 911 calls that dispatch other services that are appropriate for emergencies. We are a follow-up call. So if there is a fire, and the fire department responds and it is an encampment fire, then they report to us and say, hey, can you check out this area? We found some folks who are camping in this particular area. They had a fire, we're concerned. Can we work with these individuals? So we are the follow-up response. We would never be a first call because of danger or immediate threat.
And the only other thing that I would add is there is a triage process that's currently in place at the Ramsey County ECC. And that triage process is evaluated, and folks that are identified as possibly needing mental health services are redirected away from a law enforcement response to Ramsey County crisis. further goes down to triage if there is a medical component, say that there's somebody that may have ingested some narcotics, that might be something that's directly dispatched to fire. The calls that really go to law enforcement are the ones where there's a belief that the person is aggressive, violent, or possibly armed with a weapon. And so out of a concern for safety for our civilian staff and our social workers, the initial response typically is a police officer responding to stabilize the scene, and then COAST may arrive after the fact. Or we've created a process where they can complete an automated report that takes roughly 20 to 30 seconds, and that referral will come directly to us.
Thanks, team. There's another question in the chat about referrals to services. And there's a lot of talk about we refer and connect folks to services, but what does that actually look like, and how long does it take from referral to actual receipt of services?
So I think that that is kind of a spectrum of different type of things. And so we offer diagnostic assessments within the COAST unit. So if you need like a Rule 25 assessment, we can do that. If you need a professional statements of need, then we can do that. But obviously, when we start discussing like care coordination and getting people into actual treatment, that is dependent upon the availability of beds. And so we have had some really good successes. In 24 hours, people can move into some of those beds depending upon availability. I would say roughly there's about a week to 2 weeks on the other end that can be delayed depending upon the availability.
From our perspective at Heart, this has been a little bit of a learning journey for us. There was an idea at the beginning of the conception of our team that there would be this opportunity to encounter folks in encampments and then reconnect them to services, and it's a beautiful journey and the path is clear. We did find very quickly that the capacity in our community alone to meet the individual needs of our unsheltered folks is just not enough. So for instance, our community outreach teams have no more than 6 outreach providers within the city of St. Paul at any given time. And we have 1 outreach provider, and just in the encampments alone, we're tracking 124 individuals, right? So that's not even the number of unsheltered folks overall that the other outreach teams are trying to encounter. So I go back to when we encounter someone, we've begun to stop asking that question of like, what is the standard path? How do we get you back on the traditional path? And instead we say, what are some other options? Sam, our outreach worker, and myself, we come from a long career within the unsheltered community here in St. Paul, Dakota County, and Hennepin County. So one of the great things that we have is our collateral within our community providers. So where someone might not have been able to access shelter, because typically the shelter is full, we can make a call and say, hey, we have this particularly vulnerable individual who in this moment of time is expressing readiness, and can we figure out a way to make this work? Or relationships with a couples shelter in Minneapolis, and we have no couples shelter here in St. Paul. Is there an opportunity for this couple to have a chance to be together in shelter as they're waiting for their housing opportunity to work to open up? So we really utilize a lot of our relationship capital within our community and our service providers through that intentional building of relationship, showing up at every conversation, at every table, and being able to not hit that barrier and say, there's no openings here, or, oh, that the housing isn't adequate. We really have been able to do quite a bit more intervention and work so that it's not a matter of the standard path, but figuring out what works from other directions.
And I would add too that it really depends on the type of services too. Early on when we had begun this, we really took the approaches like, well, we're going to want it for you. And we learned very quickly that you can't want it for somebody. So really it has turned into, what are you willing to accept, and how can we leave you better than we found you? And so some of that is harm reduction, and some of it is just accessing auxiliary services through insurance, or maybe it is housing, maybe it is something completely different, maybe ultimately it is treatment. And so The timeframe often depends on what specific services you're also trying to access.
I would say that it also points to a systemic issue that's just complex. We need to assess whether service providers are doing what they say they do, and also we need additional services. And so, I mean, this creates the question: do we need more crisis stabilization centers? Do we need case management that focuses on stabilization and getting people back to pre-crisis level? And so there's been a lot of energy focused on the immediate needs, but what does it take to stabilize people long term? And that's something that we have to wrestle with now and in the future.
And for the individuals and families that I work with, it really truly is just that relentless connection with those services. And some things happen rather quickly, and a lot of things take a long time to work through when we're working with community-based organizations, as well as traditional systems, navigating their requirements from our lens also takes a very long time to do. So based on what that actual need is, the availability and capacity of those things. So therapy, connection to housing services, all of those things are generally anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks from your initial interaction into those things. Now that we're kind of in a remote, still in a remote place and space, some of those county services take an average of, I've been seeing an average of 6 to 18 weeks based on caseload, as the need has definitely expanded. Getting folks into, or young individuals into different residential populations or services is almost non-existent. So really working with how do we engage within the community and have community-based in-home services provided. And so walking through those things and stabilizing the family so that the in-home services can actually occur. And so we are really wanting to do what they are asking to do for that. So we're really working on getting those things addressed.
So we've had a lot of conversation internally about the fact that there are a lot of long-term, long-standing challenges that we face as a city and county, and getting people connected to service and maintaining the services that they are connected to really, quote unquote, stop the bleeding, right, of folks entering homelessness. Can you all talk about the partnerships that have been developed to help make those connections, and that maybe are outside of the box, that aren't just the standard service providers that we're working with? What are those partnerships and what do they look like?
I can speak to our end working with the unsheltered, and I do want to make sure that I address also the comment in the chat. You know, I managed an emergency shelter here in St. Paul for 3 years prior to taking this position. And I don't know if there's something louder than a squeaky wheel, but I was whatever that next step is, right? Every time I identified a gap when someone was leaving emergency shelter, when we had to turn people away in the dark of the night, when we had folks who could not manage in congregate shelter and our only response was police or fire, right? Like, none of that felt right. And I would be at the table saying, this isn't working. Like, I am at the bottom of the trajectory of someone's life in St. Paul. And there are so many gaps here. And repeatedly, I'm trying to instill enough hope in an individual that they make it through the next day and return to our shelter at night, knowing that the next day will be similar, but just instilling that hope. As a result of that, right? Like, when you're the loudest person in the room, then people start giving you responsibilities because it seems like you have the answers, which you might not, but you still have to follow through. So one example here in St. Paul, we are starting something we've never done before with a partnership with Ramsey County and our faith communities. And we're opening up our warming hubs this winter. The warming hubs are 100% low barrier for folks to be able to come in and get respite from the cold in the middle of the night. They'll be running from December to March. This isn't housing, this isn't a golden ticket out of homelessness, but it's a moment in time where Ramsey County and the city has said we cannot continue to go about our day when there are folks that fall into a pit of darkness in the cold of winter with no option but police and fire, which is jail or hospital or brief interaction and then being discharged, right? And so this is the beginning of people coming together. And it took a lot going to faith communities and saying, I know it's difficult to come up with folks in your church who can stay up all night and still go to their job at the next day, or retirees who are not comfortable coming out at night and working with a population of people that they may not encounter on a daily basis. And there's a whole nother comfort level there, but we're pulling it together. And so I would say that nothing will ever move fast enough. People deserve better. We are slow to learn. Systems move slow. But to really know that there are individuals in all of our areas that are championing for change. I can't create housing. I can't open up more hospitals. People will continually be stuck right now in systems that don't move fast enough. I acknowledge that. But as a champion for our community here in St. Paul, I can show up and say, but what am I able to do in the meantime? I work with unsheltered folks, and I am going to fill this gap in partnership with other entities. And so we brought in the Union Gospel Mission, we brought in our faith communities, we're working with all of our shelters, we're working with the county, and this is going somewhere. And this is people coming together to bring answers to folks who are falling through the gaps.
Yeah, and I would just kind of dovetail off of what Andrea had said. Infrastructurally and systematically, the mental health system, and you would even talk to some of those folks that really advocate, would say that the mental health system isn't broken. It was never built. And so in the dead of the night at 11:30 o'clock or at 11:30 p.m., the question is for any law enforcement officer that's out there and they're with somebody who's in crisis and they need to go somewhere, are they going to go to the hospital or are they going to go to jail? And the unfortunate reality is for people that don't voluntarily accept some of those services, they usually go down one of two different paths. Either they get to the point where they are hospitalized, they do engage in some voluntary services, or they become criminal justice involved. And so what we've had to do in building partnerships is frequent meetings with the city and county attorneys to advocate for mental health resources or Rule 20 evaluations so that people can access mental health care. And it's not an ideal situation, but we're trying to work within the confines of the system that we have. And while we can always try to envision a better system in the future, the reality is that may happen in 2, 3, 5 years, it might be 10 years down the road. And so trying to build out partnerships from all different entities, whether it's the city and county attorneys, CPS, adult protection, Ramsey County Crisis, you name it, we've built partnerships with them to try to address the systematic gaps.
And just to piggyback off of what both of my coworkers and colleagues have already said, is that part of this initiative and this is about changing the systems as a whole and really looking at what are those alternative options and really leaning back on the community and saying, how do we take those next steps? So the original question was, how do we engage? And really, like Andrea said, is really putting, going back to the community and saying, where can we find this? How can we fund that? Bolstering those community-based agencies that are doing that grass levels work and doing it well and giving them those sustainability. Because as it was kind of said in the chat, we understand that some of those systems, and like Justin said, were broken or never built and never meant to address the places and the individuals and the residents that we find ourselves in now, but also saying that those past practices did not work. And so how do we look at new practices, but also how do we look at what each individual person needs within that ecosystem and finding that that correct person to engage. And none of us stand in this room or in this place saying we've got it all figured out. We come across our own barriers within our systems in which we work, and we try to navigate those as well so that individuals don't have to continue to navigate that, and always looking for new and innovative ways to do those things differently. We recognize that it needs to be different, and we don't have all of the answers. And we're always looking for those new places and spaces to do the work the right way and to impact folks. And so as we look at what do people need and how do we need it, is listening to them. And that's really what these circles and these funding streams are looking at now, and not using those same traditional pathways that we used in the past.
Andrea, will the Warming Hub information be posted online, or how can folks get access to that information when it is available?
I want to say that you'll be able to find it on most websites, the Ramsey County website, our St. Paul website as well, stpaul.gov. The funding is housed in Ramsey County, so they will sort of be the initiator of the rollout. We have an informational meeting today that we'll be presenting, and then by the end of the week we'll have pretty much everything set in stone, so it will be able to be put out. I can say that we've had great response by the St. Paul Parks has opened facilities. We also have Faith City Church on East 7th that's opening up 2 nights a week to single moms with children. The Union Gospel Mission is opening up a space for 60 individuals. And transportation will be provided throughout all of the locations to take that burden off of folks to navigate it on their own. So the infrastructure is being built, and we probably would have rather had it ready a week ago or even 2 weeks ago. This is our first time. So December 1st is the launch date, and we're excited to see what more we can do as winter continues to show.
Director Blakey, you had mentioned that we're all running into challenges in the systems that we work in. Can you all speak to some of those challenges that you are seeing and how they're being addressed?
Sure. I think the challenges that we're seeing are some of those very same frustrations that we're hearing from community. Is you said you were going to do this a long time ago. There's been funding that has been addressed for this. Why hasn't it changed? And as we see, it really is taking those next steps and figuring out how do we engage in those different things and be authentic in what we're doing. And just being, like, as Andrea said, the squeakiest wheel in the room, saying that exact thing. I think we were chosen because we are ones that test and challenge the system and the status quo to do those things, and really doing things and asking for forgiveness later is really saying what is needed for that client, that person at that moment, that falls within the realm of what makes sense for that family and what's within our abilities to do that. And again, the challenges are addressing those things and saying, can we do it differently? Why is that in place? I mean, I think for some of those families, and we're talking about, housing and things like that. If you're a victim, or if your child is a suspect in a certain crime, how does that impact where you can live, what jobs you can go to, what schools they can attend, all of those things, and pressuring and having conversations about those next steps. So really what it is just really continuing to talk about it, taking action steps to doing that, and then showing the systems there are different ways to do this, and that you can be successful in doing those things. And so it takes time. I have frustrating moments just like others that are like, why is it taking so long? Why can't we get that way? But we're working within other federal and state systems and county systems. We're doing it and being very innovative in the city. It's really, the city is pushing those things, but we also have state constraints, federal constraints. And so we're navigating within them and challenging them at every turn that we have, and being innovative in those processes.
There's a question in the chat about transport holds. How are those handled? And Justin, I think you might be a good person to answer this, given that that is kind of the sphere in which you work, but also the complexities of what is mandated and allowed and state statutes that surround that work.
Yeah, so transport holds have become incredibly problematic in law enforcement in both affecting them and the requests for them. So when I started my law enforcement career over 15 years ago, it was pretty black and white, where if you had a transport hold that was signed, you would physically restrain somebody and transport them to the hospital. What has happened in the last 5 years is an exceptional amount of case law. And so specific to the folks in Minnesota, there's been changes as far as when you can take people, and really the onus has become on the officers, because what's written in the statute is that a law enforcement officer may transport somebody based on a transport hold. It's not required. And then they have to kind of evaluate a lot of different pieces. So you have the transport hold, but then what kind of physical restraint are you going to have to use to get that person to the hospital? And is that physical restraint going to cause more harm than it is good? And so you might have somebody who is needing a transport hold and is psychotic, but they're not necessarily demonstrating a danger to themselves or others. And so that law enforcement officer then has to articulate the amount of force that they would have to use to get the person to the hospital based on a lot of different case law. And there's been case law to say that, you know, even when somebody has a transport hold on them, there was a specific case, I think it's Pinehurst versus Armstrong, which said the person had left the hospital, they were outside eating grass, they were making psychotic statements. The medical staff at the hospital had put a hold on the person and requested law enforcement return them to the hospital. He went outside, that individual had grabbed a hold of a large sign, and there were several officers there that were trying to pry him away from the sign to get him back to the hospital. A physical altercation ensued. A taser was used to subdue him and get him into custody. That person went into cardiac arrest and died, unfortunately. And then the judge came back and said that wasn't a legitimate use of force. You don't have the authority to use that higher level of force to bring somebody back to the hospital, even if there is a hold. And so that's kind of indicative of a lot of the case law that we've seen over the last several years and the challenges, because really the challenge is the decision on the officer to enforce that hold.
Justin, I don't know if you see the clarification in the chat. The mental health professionals assess the person as a danger to themselves or others, and an officer arrives and it's like, no, they seem fine.
Again, I think that is speaking to the officer's ability to articulate what kind of force and restraint that they're going to use. And so if somebody's sitting there quietly, or even if they're making delusional statements, but they're speaking specifically to themselves, I think the situation is incredibly different when they're making threats to staff and saying, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And you almost have to wonder in those situations, is there also a crime that maybe needs to be reported as well, and say that this isn't just a mental health episode, it's also this person has assaulted staff. And so oftentimes with the recent changes in case law, we've found that it's easier to articulate taking somebody into custody for a arrestable offense than it is to take somebody into custody for a mental health crisis. And this is all based on case law. This isn't me us making up a decision to say that we're just not going to do this. There's a litany of different cases that have happened over the last 5 years that really have impacted us. There was one out of Minneapolis where there was an individual that was making some statements about potentially leaving their house to harm a family member. And the police department had responded. They had gone out there. They had tried to engage the person. Ultimately, the decision was made that they would remove a screen door, access the residence, and remove the person. The judge came back and said that wasn't reasonable because the police department was outside of the house. Even though they were making threats, were they going to be able to drive to this location to affect the threats that they were making? And so that is the type of case law that we're up against. And so in the event that something egregious does happen and unfortunately somebody gets hurt, really the question is going to be asked of the law enforcement officers, why did you feel that this was urgent, that they needed to go immediately?
Thanks, Sergeant Tiffany. We have like 2 minutes left, so I would love to hear from the team, ways that folks can get involved. How can folks get involved?
Well, I will say that our warming hubs will need a slew of volunteers and folks that are willing and able to offer radical hospitality to our most in need community members seeking warmth this winter. If that is something that you might be interested in, you should email me directly and I can absolutely assist in connecting you. We will be having a volunteer training, and a lot of more opportunities. Additionally, the first Thursday of every month, we host a panel, a community engagement panel that includes our shelter staff, our day center staff, our city staff, our county staff, our police department, where you can come at Faith City Church on 7th Street East. I think it's 581, could be 518. That would be something to Google. But it is at 7 p.m. where folks can answer and ask all the questions about just systems, coordination, how do we just as an individual be there for our neighbors in need? Where do we find our level of safety versus our level of discomfort, and how do we reconcile those? Also learn about recent drug trends within our systems of deep poverty, to learn what things look like and also feel like to an individual who is struggling. Like, these panels are filled with information. Email me if you're interested in attending any of those. For us at Heart, the more we're talking, the more conversation we have, the more education we are open to, the more we can respond and the more adequately we can begin to fill the gaps within our community. So I invite you to reach out. If you have any questions, you want to get more involved, you want to just participate and attend these panels, I am 100% available. My email is here.
And the Office of Neighborhood Safety has a Neighborhood Safety Community Council, which we are accepting current applications, and that is really your ability to change policy, affect where those funds go to, as we have a grant making arm. And so I will shamelessly plug that as well. And we'll put that in the chat as well.
Thank you, everyone. Director Blakey will put that information in the chat. It's also available on stpaul.gov, stpaul.gov. And we thank you for your time today and the questions. And our contact information is in the chat. Enjoy the rest of the conference.